The last conversation, we heard a lot about politics, policy, technology. But one thing the panel didn't dive into is time frames with climate change. So how much time do we actually have? You want to start with that, Hal?
I've heard it said that if we do everything correctly, starting instantly will be okay. That's not a super likely scenario, but there was a study out of Oxford just about 3 weeks ago that says if you look at the economic life of carbon burning equipment in the economy, and you look at trying to stabilize it 4 degrees Fahrenheit, you have to stop building carbon burning equipment by 2017 in order to stabilize. So in other words, all new capacity after 2017, which is next year, has to be zero carbon worldwide. Or
that's not happening, right?
Or you have to be willing to retire perfectly good equipment because it's emitting a lot of CO2.
But that doesn't mean we should give up, right? I mean,
au contraire, no. So that's the bad news. The good news, and this is a race between two nonlinear systems, right? The natural nonlinear systems of the Earth hitting tipping points, and the nonlinear systems of technology and economics. On the technology and economics side, people have heard these statistics. We've seen more than 80% drop in solar prices in the last 5 years. So the most recent bids, 3 cents a kilowatt hour. That's cheaper than the operating cost of coal. So we're seeing crossover lines and levels of doublings that have never been seen in energy technology history. And it's not just solar or wind or LEDs, it's systems, it's new methods of manufacture, it's zero net energy buildings, which are now cost effective in many parts of the world. So I'm an optimist. I think the transition can happen much more quickly than most realize.
Okay, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here a bit because renewables are still a small percentage of our overall energy system. So, I mean, can we ramp up renewables in 10 years? And is that fast enough? 20 years? I mean, how much time do we have?
We're ramping them up now. I mean, you know, so it's not can you achieve a line that you can extrapolate from incredible exponential growth and inflection? We've already hit the inflections, right? So take that line further out and you can quantify sort of your answer, right? But yeah, it's fairly standard for everybody to go, well, it's a small piece of things and it's probably never going to amount to much. I mean, we've said that from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. You know, the problem is that the forecasts are changing and with the rapid inflection and escalation of renewable penetration, you're seeing a inverse line with a very rapid decline in pricing. And so much of that is because we're moving away from mechanical energy, even renewables like large-scale wind, and the further we move into devices and solar technology and other things that are migrations from semiconductors or closer to Moore's law-based industries, those price declines begin to follow those curves instead of the industry's traditional lines of innovation. So I think you're seeing both at very rapid levels, enormous, unprecedented price declines. I mean, solar is under coal now, right? That was not something thought of.
Solar is less than operating old coal today.
Right?
Utility scale.
Utility scale.
Right.
But just to locate this in California for 1 sec, we're the 8th largest economy in the world, arguably the most modern economy in the world. We've already signed all the contracts to be 1/3 renewables by 2020. 50% renewables by 2030 is a cakewalk, and that does not count the existing nuclear and hydro. So we'll be close to 70% decarbonized in just 14 years.
And so the point is, it's not theoretical, it's quantifiable, right? And the question is, are you able to accept our traditional thinkers with more linear forecast and linear practices in the way that they adapt to change? Are they able to adapt to something we know that is quantifiable, has hit inflection points, and is now moving on an exponential curve instead of the curve we've been accustomed to since Edison did the light bulb?
But for every California, we've got a Nevada that's blocking solar installations. We've got West Virginia where Trump says he's going to put coal workers back to work. So if we're at 1% now in this country in solar, how do you get the rest of the country up to 50% like California by 2030? I mean, we have to do that if we're going to meet that 3.6 degree Fahrenheit. I've learned to use Fahrenheit now after the last panel for climate change.
I mean, don't forget that California is not the biggest renewable state. You know, Texas, the carbon-intensive state is, right? And so these things can happen very, very fast in ways that you wouldn't expect. And so was it because everybody was green in West Texas? No, it was because of a bunch of red rock Republican farmers and ranchers with enormous land with gas wells all over them. Some wind developers came in and said, hey, all this stuff blowing tumbleweeds across your landscape can make you money in royalties. So that adopted like wildfire at scale in ways that with California with the 20-year head start passed it in 24 months, right? So these things can happen very, very fast if you get the economics and incentives aligned. And by the way, that was then Governor Bush's very innovative RPS that was put in place to accelerate that, and it was copied. So economics drives a lot. And it's not just the economics of the few, it's how do you arrange economics so that all the places that wind was happening in West Texas or need to happen in West Virginia or Nevada can be shared economics and bring communities up and get buy-in in ways that people are seeing. My PTA is funded, my Scout Troop is funded because these new energy sources and this innovation is diffused in a way that matters.
But California has done it through legislation, right? The 50% renewable is a law that got passed. So the rest of the country, I don't see the red states passing that kind of regulation.
My favorite phrase nowadays is accidental compliance. So a number of the states that most despise the Clean Power Plan are going to comply anyway. And the reason is because of these dynamics of change. We did some very careful analysis of why the US has reduced its CO2 emissions faster than any country in history and to a larger degree. Most people think it's natural gas. And natural gas was number 4 out of 4 factors. The first one is one we don't want, which is a recession. The second is energy efficiency, and this is sort of the invisible resource. And it's as big as renewables. It's as big as any other source by a long shot. When Andy was Assistant Secretary of Energy, he promulgated dozens of standards to just avoid energy waste. And these save consumers vast amounts of money, but there's no object there, so you don't see it. The third was renewable energy, new renewables. And the last was natural gas. And that's only if you don't count the methane emissions from natural gas, the fugitive emissions, which of course would put it even further back. I mean, still number 4, but a much smaller contributor. So it's underway, is the point.
It's underway. So you're both
I'm not saying
that we're going to make it.
Yeah,
I mean, we're not going to get the
innovation
9-meter rise.
I mean, innovation does not have a party, right? I mean, you can get policies more right in one place or another. But the idea that some of the Internet of Things devices, that electric cars, solar panels, all of these things are subversive to our model of we all need this utility to deliver us energy in ways we don't care as long as the lights are on, right? Now that this is getting to a consumer-driven revolution, now that we have changed, when I began in the energy business, the whole discussion was measuring at the fence line. You crazy independent power developers and your crazy private enterprise, we're going to have a fence line and measure with the utility. And then we got to the discussion, because the technology pulled it that way, of behind the meter. All these technologies force us to think behind the meter. We're soon going to be thinking about how we measure things at the plug point, because every device in our world is going to be IP addressable, Wi-Fi connected, and either produce, store, or utilize energies in some form or fashion. So in that world where that device can be picked up, where my 86-year-old Republican dad who watches too much Fox News can go into Home Depot and come out with solar panels on his roof in the next week and a Nest thermostat and new devices that take him to an almost zero energy home that's 40 years old, in that environment, the policymakers are less relevant to the rate of change, but they're not benign, right? The thing that Hal is doing that is so remarkable is giving them tools to think better and understand that their role is never neutral. They will always either be an impediment or an accelerant. And our goal is how to give them smart policy so that they accelerate the right things that the innovation is already catalyzing. Yeah.
Hal, let's switch a bit to nuclear power. I mean, all this, the technology that Andy's talking about, the Internet of Things and efficiency, it's fantastic. It'll get us part of the way there, but we're going to need some other big technology. I mean, we have our nukes expiring over the next couple of decades, 20% of our power load. What's your take on nuclear power?
So first of all, it's great to celebrate the advances we've had in recent years, as Andy and I have just had. And we can look for future, like the electrification of transportation and zero net energy buildings. This is not to say the policy job is done, not by any means at all, because we need a further suite of technologies, and we need to turn over the obsolete equipment. Otherwise, we'll just run it forever. Nuclear power is an interesting case. It's the fissure line, if you will excuse the pun, between energy mavens. Everyone's either for it or against it. I like to say, I'm using David Mackay's phrase, I'm pro-math. I'm not pro-nuclear, I'm not pro-solar, I'm pro-math. Here's the simple math with nuclear, and it's kind of frightening. There are 400 reactors in the world. They're essentially all Generation 2 reactors. They were mostly built in the 70s and 80s, and they're all going away because they're embrittled and they're old, and it costs more to fix them than to run them. So we're going to take that off the table in the next couple decades. There's maybe a dozen or two third-gen reactors which are supposed to be safer and operate better, but I predict there will never be more than double-digit third-gen reactors because they're incredibly expensive. The last ones coming online in Europe are 17 to 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So if we take away Gen 2, and Gen 3 has a very low ceiling, what's next? Gen 4, the small modular reactors which are proliferation resistant and cheap and inherently safe and don't have waste byproducts. And the only problem with them is they don't exist. So what does it cost to create them? It costs a minimum, in my opinion, of $10 billion to thoroughly test a design and see if it's commercial ready. Yeah. And so the world...
What's the time frame on that, Hal?
Well, it's decadal plus. And so the world is not organized to create a serious nuclear option, not yet. And I think we should do the R&D.
Right.
I think we should find out if this is feasible, but we're not there yet.
I would say, Brian, what is the cost of not creating them, right? This is, to me, dealing with nuclear is not an optional discussion for this country or for this planet, right? We've done it. Whether we like it or not, we have unleashed on mankind the power of splitting the atom. This nation did it in the middle of a war. All the consequences of our world changed from that moment onward. And we can't vacate the field of moral responsibility we have to fixing and detoxifying the end of the nuclear waste streams and to understanding and harnessing that power for peace and for the betterment of the environment in the way that it clearly can serve as an emission-free source. So letting our fleet atrophy without a deliberative strategy over the time frame that all of that emission-free power is coming offline because of a temporary bump in fossil fuels is about as a dumb, not forward-looking a strategy as this country's ever had. We can't abdicate. We have got to be in the field of nuclear power, and we've got to rededicate ourselves to the purpose of cleaning it, making it safe, and getting it right.
Wow. Okay, we're going to have a breakout tomorrow on nuclear power for those of you who want to dig a little deeper. And I want you to be thinking about some questions, but I have one more question for Andy before we open it up. So what is a space cowboy? And are there any Hail Marys at Google X that might enable us not to have to build these nukes?
Well, so Gangster of Love was taken. I let my team name me, and so that sort of stuck, and it sort of fit the age demographic for those who get the reference.
Yes.
But functionally, what I am is a senior strategist on the team at X, the Moonshot Factory, in deference to Prince, the company formerly known as Google X, and what we do is moonshots. But I don't think of those moonshots as Hail Marys. I think of it like a moonshot as very deliberative planning towards an enormous innovation and breakthrough objective that is worthy because it is hard and not because it is easy, and takes longer than a traditional R&D lab could otherwise tolerate. So in many ways, in the spirit of Bell Labs or our national labs, X has the opportunity to plan longer cycles for bigger breakthroughs, but always with a destination that has a sight line to the marketplace. And so I hope that there are more X moonshot factories sponsored by more companies around.
So what's your favorite moonshot?
Well, I love all of them that are public that you know about. Let me start there. Bill Ford was up here today talking about the disruption of autonomous driving vehicles, self-driving cars, and sort of 36 months ago, people were saying, boy, that's a bunch of guys on skateboards smoking something, and now it's something that sort of Detroit and many of the global producers view as inevitable and something that's completely convergent with Uber and Lyft and everything else. And so in a way, so many stages of that moonshot, low Earth orbit, and going to the moon are already sort of en route, right? And we don't have to own all of the necessary net benefit to catalyze significant change. So I'm sort of, I'm proud and fond of that, but obviously my angle is always on energy, and I'm very keen on a lot of the work that we're doing in storage, particularly the stuff that affects and enables things like Project Loon or some of our drones to have delivery systems of really important goods for humanity, like Wi-Fi connectivity and curing the digital divide.
Self-driving cars by 2020?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Okay, questions in the audience? There's one over here. Please identify yourself.
Sure. Hi, Brian. Nate Lewis, Caltech. Hi to both of you.
Hey, Nate.
Hey, Nate.
Good. I have a question that may be arguably the elephant in the room here that hasn't been not mentioned nearly as much, in my opinion, as we dance around the two big issues. One is, you can tweet it, he that cannot store shall not have power after 4. And the next is, there's no such thing as a plug-in hybrid airplane. So no matter what we do with policy, no matter what we do with building nukes, if we have intermittent resources, it seems that the next Google X, the next Google, is in storage at seasonal scales and very long times to compensate for intermittency, and in figuring out a way to keep that 40% of transportation that can't be electrified in the air and on those UPS trucks and on those intercontinental ships. So why don't we just agree that those are the things that we really need to do that we can't do, and then go for it?
Well, Hal will start by disagreeing with you, so I'm going to let him take that.
Let me start on the electrical side. Nobody would love large-scale, super cheap storage more than me, but we're not going to have that for a while. In the electric grid, there are about 6 things you can do to handle variable renewables, and of those 6, storage is the most expensive. The cheapest one is simply changing some of the rules about how you operate the grid. For example, in California, we're not allowed to export bulk electricity. So we have times in California today where we're simultaneously curtailing solar and wind and importing electricity. Tell me that makes sense. Second, and so there are huge numbers of ways you can optimize the grid across geographies. The wind covariance disappears between Wyoming and Southern California. Seattle and San Diego never have the same peak supply or the same peak demand. Hook the wires up that exist and let the markets flow. So that's the first thing.
But the sun sets at the end of the day.
Sure, the sun sets. But if you look at the suite of renewable energy sources, you have, in theory and in time, onshore wind, offshore wind, totally different. You have wind in Wyoming, which has a different regime than wind in California. You've got rooftop solar, you have solar that you can point east, you have solar thermal that can store heat. You have geothermal, you have hydro, you have the Bonneville Power Administration is the largest, cheapest electrical battery in North America.
You're saying a diversified portfolio.
Exactly. A diversified portfolio in an optimized system. Asterisk, that's hugely important. And that requires some more grid and better operation of the existing grid. And lastly, I have nothing against a natural gas turbine that runs 400 hours a year and kicks on when you need it and shuts off when you don't. That's a tiny carbon, and think how much cheaper it is to run a 500 megawatt gas turbine for 400 hours a year than to try to build that battery.
So, Andy, did Hal persuade you to drop your storage project to Google X?
No. And I'm not entirely in disagreement with Hal or Nate with respect to storage. I mean, I view it as a high priority. I view it as something that deserves singular focus for breakthroughs, and I view it as the thing that should not be held out as the impediment for investment by many intransigent members of the energy incumbency. I remember when I started a wind company in 1999, which was very early. I can remember a French minister saying to me, "What's with the wind? I can watch TV if you do the wind, and the wind stops and the channel goes away." And it's like really, you're peddling this, and you're a minister, and so this is a more sophisticated version. When we get all the way down the road and people say the intermittency problem means you dog the renewable growth rate. What we do with storage is begin to solve, and hopefully with big storage breakthroughs that can get to comparable parity in energy densities, you begin to solve for even a greater acceleration of renewables. But there's nothing inherently that should slow it down now based on maybe the 10-year cycle we need to have super breakthroughs in storage. Let me touch a little bit on the second part of Nate's question because it's very important. When I was in office and we had an oil crisis, crisis at $147 oil, we did 100x growth rate in the R&D on batteries, but we didn't have any electric cars on the road at all commercially, right? So we, with Ahmadinejad and Putin and Chavez meeting to start a new OPEC, and us not yet understanding what was beneath our ground on the shale, we desperately needed the credible threat of immediate liquid substitution for petroleum-based fuels in our fuel mix, and it got created through biofuels. And we know that corn-based ethanol was never meant to be anything more than creating a bumper or a cushion for a decadal period, even before we predicted a breakthrough in batteries could come about for enough EVs to be on the road. But what we also learned in that period is we can get to biological balance with advanced biofuels, and that has slowed and middled necessarily because the economics have gone through the floor with the oil shale, right? But that has unleashed a revolution that has come out of genomics and biotech that has created things like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA for $99 that we couldn't have imagined when we first sequenced our DNA a decade and a half ago, right? That genomics revolution continues, and I have confidence that we will get to a place where we can have a natural balance in advanced biofuels that don't compete with our food systems, and that's what we have to redirect into the places where liquid fuels will continue to be needed.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so a quick question with a quick answer to both of you. When does the United States hit 50% renewables? We're about 5% now, if you count wind and solar, so when do we hit 50%?
Between 2030 and 2035.
Okay, Andy?
Boy, I like that boldness. Yeah, are you including everything?
That's the
hydro
grid.
and
No, because
geo
no, it's just solar and wind.
Just the grid.
Just solar
Just
and
the
wind.
grid,
you said. Okay.
yeah.
You still with that with just solar and wind?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. I still love your boldness. Yeah, I'll go a little further out than that, but I like that. I'll stick with 2035 to 2040. How about that?
Okay.